In 1913, a privately organized art show shocked America by exhibiting modern European works. The Armory Show allowed America to become a leader in art and made an impact that left a legacy on the nation. "1913 was a time of change in America. Electricity was coming into widespread use. Women's suffrage was gaining attention, and new buildings, like the Woolworth Building, were opening in New York. Modern art had not yet been seen in America, except for in a small gallery called 291, which was operated by the photographer Alfred Stieglitz.
Alfred Stieglitz, in addition to being a pioneering photographer and someone who promoted photography as a fine art, did operate a really groundbreaking gallery called 291. And he exhibited before the Armory Show people like Auguste Rodin, Pablo Picasso, and Henri Matisse. 291 was primarily known to people who were already insiders, who kind of already knew about advanced modernism.
At the time, the National Academy of Design controlled American art. However, there was a small group of artists called the Ashcan School that was rebelling against the Academy. On December 19, 1911, the future Armory Show organizers founded the Association of American Painters and Sculptors. The association was opposed to the National Academy of Design, and was founded with the goal of leading the public taste in art rather than following it. Among the founders was Arthur B. Davies, who would later be the most important person to organizing the Armory Show. Walt Kuhn, the association's secretary, was also important to the show. J. Alden Weir was the original president of the AAPS. However, he resigned after learning of the association's opposition to the National Academy of Design. Following this, Davies became the president. From the very beginning, the AAPS wanted to host a show featuring art that got little attention in America. The Armory Show originally only included American art. However, Davies convinced the association to include modern European works as well. In 1912, Davies and Kuhn traveled to Europe to gather works for the show. They visited Germany, the Netherlands, France, and Great Britain. In Europe, they met Walter Pock, who introduced them to many of the European artists. Of the artists that exhibited at the show, the Duchamp brothers got the most attention. Marcel Duchamp, the Cubist painter, got the most press of any artist. The sculptor Constantine Brancusi was another prominent artist. The leader of the Cubists, Pablo Picasso, the leader of the Fauvists, Henri Matisse, and another Cubist, Francis Picabia, also attracted much attention. Though the European art got the most attention, there was actually much more American art. Prominent American artists included the organizers, such as Arthur B. Davies and Walt Kuhn, and others such as George Bellows and Robert Henry. In total, there were over 1,000 works in the show. Though the press talked about a group called the Futurists, their work never made it into the show.
The American critics talk about Cubism, Futurism, and other art movements in an almost interchangeable way, and I think that's based on their lack of familiarity with the terms. Futurism was a rather new idea, and it really hadn't filtered into the American critical vocabulary in an informed way.
The organizers wanted to show the progression of modernism, so they exhibited some older works by artists such as Van Gogh, Cézanne, and Delacroix. On February 17, 1913, the International Exhibition of Modern Art opened in the greenery-trimmed 69th Regiment Armory. The press quickly responded to the show. They referred to modern art as freak art, or a nightmare on canvas, and one interviewee called it degrading, degenerate, and an evil influence. The press enjoyed mocking the modern art at the show. One of the ways that they did this was through cartoons.
One of the most interesting aspects of the Armory Show was the kind of invective that the critics used when they wanted to bash the work. And a lot of cartoonists got into the action too. And this is actually John Sloan, who was an established artist, but he published this in a magazine called The Masses. And so you have a lot of cartoons that are actually imitating the style of Cubism, of Duchamp's New Descending a Staircase, and of other innovations.
By its closing, the show had received 87,000 visitors. Following its success in New York, the show traveled to the Art Institute of Chicago. Though the European collection remained intact, many of the American works were eliminated. The Chicago show got much higher attendance, with 188,000 visitors. On the last day of the exhibition, students from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago held a protest, which included a mock trial, ending in the burning of copies of Matisse paintings. It also traveled to the Copley Society in Boston. It received only 14,000 visitors.
It went to Boston, which was a little more culturally conservative, and also part of the show was eliminated. They only took the European works because the size of the venue was smaller. And there it didn't actually get that much attention. I think that culturally, the attention that it had gotten sort of petered out in New York. And then that has something to do with the culture of the respective cities, but also that it had been around for a while.
Though Baltimore, Des Moines, and Seattle did request the show, the AAPS did not let it tour any further. Though the Armory Show was a huge success, shortly after it, the AAPS broke up.
The group of artists that's sometimes called the Eight, who's sort of represented by John Sloan, Robert Henry, and some others, who were kind of realist artists. After the show, they split off from the organization, and their excuse for that is based on the fact that on a dispute over the finances of the show. But what most historians think is that the actual arguments about it were based more on philosophy and on artistic approaches as much as they were finances.
Immediately after the Armory Show, there was a clear change in American art.
This is Joseph Stella, an American artist, Italian-American. In this work from 1912, right before the Armory Show, and this is one of the pieces that we exhibited in the American section of the show, it's still relatively realistic. It's tied to sort of the Impressionist way of making art. By 1913, 1914, right after the show, he's making things like this. Now, this is called the Battle of the Lights, Coney Island, and it shows this fabulous clash of electric lights and arbitrary colors, and the suggestions of the amusement park that was Coney Island, but very much tied to a non-objective or abstract way of looking.
Later in the century, America began to lead the art world. Movements such as abstract expressionism and pop art were either founded or perfected in America. Also, many prominent European artists moved to America for several years.
Into the 1920s, into the 1930s, there are a lot of American artists who make really interesting art, but who reject modernism. You have other artists who really do begin to explore modernism. So these things coexist for a long time. I would say that by the 1950s, though, modernism in many ways becomes something of a cultural norm. You have a generation of artists like Jackson Pollock, like Willem de Kooning, abstract expressionists, who are making art that is both very American and breaking new ground within modernism.
The 1913 Armory Show led America into the age of modern art. It left such a legacy that it allowed American artists to become leaders in the art world. The Armory Show changed how Americans viewed and thought about art, and forever changed how our nation's artists created it.